Why did that guy at work finally get fired? Guy in the shipping department kept calling the shop manager a clown, to his face, and was warned to stop. The guy finally got fired when he decided to play circus music at full volume the next time the boss man came around. This is pretty funny though. The music was a nice touch. Man, some confetti cannons and a bicycle riding bear would have really made it. She messaged in the group chat we had for employees saying something along the lines of how she hates the job and she hoped the building burned down. Loved that girl. Had a very similar situation at my workplace. Was insulting the store manager as well, and apparently that's what tipped the scales. I don't know what industry this is, but in food service you can insult any store manager to their face all you want and they won't give a shit, but the second it gets online you're the target of a manhunt. He was found sleeping under his desk. When awake he was caught repeatedly sneaking out the back door, no receptionist, and leaving for hours. He was taking credit for the work of others while trying to pawn his work off on the data entry girl. He worked there for 2.5 weeks. He put an ultrasound-guided fore in a patient's artery instead of their vein. He wasn't signed off on performing that task yet and did it anyways. That sounds very bad, but I have no idea just how bad. On a scale of stub-toe to spontaneous combustion, how bad is this? I worked at a first-class/business class lounge at an airport. Shift leader took pictures of me in the restroom and showed it to me laughing. He was given his turn talking to and a slap on the wrist by the general manager, and so I left the company. Heard from one of the coworkers that he got caught masturbating in the restroom and the general manager let him off with another warning. Turns out one of the big bosses of the company was the one that caught him during a personal trip and fired both the team leader and general manager. TLDR, team leader and GM got fired for sexual harassment by a big boss after evading any type of repercussions. I'm a software engineer. My company hired a software architect who specialized in a different field. About a week after joining, he declared we need to restructure the whole software. So far so good, except the new structure was not clear to anyone but himself. He could not explain what was wrong with the existing structure. Now, software engineering is still engineering. There's some leeway, but ultimately there are right and wrong answers. Reasonably adept engineers should be able to communicate and convince each other of ideas, barring their egos. This guy, though, just sort of made up his own language. Like he'd tell you the software needs to be made of boondoggles connected to flimbusters, and you'd ask what he meant by flimbuster and he'd just launch into a long, 10 uninterrupted minutes, explanation at the end of which you still had no idea. While this was going on, he was generally being annoying. Nothing earth-shattering, but he'd leave empty coffee cups on people's desks, would pull them in a brief discussion that would take up over an hour, badmouthed some of us to the rest of us, badmouthed some of us to upper management, generally sleazy stuff. It went on for 2 months. 2 months where we engineers genuinely couldn't figure out if the guy is a misunderstood genius or a scam artist, because nobody could figure out what he's on about, and he was extremely adamant about whatever it was, repeatedly bashing the existing architecture for being a dead end. It ended when one of us basically called him on his bullshit. Told management we can't figure out what to do here. Let's take all the time we need to make it concrete and just spend entire days locked in a room with him and management, slowly forcing him to go into details. The end game was for Mr. Architect to write a document explaining in full detail what needs to be done. He had 2 weeks. He didn't show up to work after they passed, and the document he left behind was just the chapter headings. I think we dodged a bullet, but the story is so crazy I don't think I'll ever be free of the doubt that maybe he really had a good idea I was too dumb to comprehend. Got caught vaping in a clean room with hydrofluoric acid, butanol, and a salt bath with a temperature of 500 degrees Celsius near him. Just like, WTF? How is that dude still alive? Was he trying to have a near-fatal accident? The only thing you're supposed to do near HF is concentrate on not dying. Near HF even retaining bowel control is optional so long as you don't die. I've worked with a lot of scary stuff, but HF is up there with oh Jesus I should have brought the brown trousers. Guy always got to work high. As in, couldn't function high. We worked at a grocery store, so the work wasn't hard, but we tried extra days of training anyway. Guy said the job was too difficult and that he was going to quit. We tried to convince him not to, but left him alone after that. About a week later, we have a picture of him in the office on the do not serve wall. Turns out he sent a letter to management threatening their safety and had a no trespass and no contact order for the premises. Why in the world would you convince him not to quit if he came to work too high to function? This guy Sharky continually came to work late, civil construction site, and then went out, got drunk and shit the bed. He then tried to wash an electric blanket in the washing machine. This all happened in the share house that my company pays for. People like this are building your bridges and roads. My electric blanket is machine washable. I mean, the rest of it is reprehensible, but maybe the blanket part isn't as bad as it sounds. He missed a major deadline and didn't tell anyone and didn't show up to work to face the music. Then they found out he was assigning some of his work to another coworker but turning it in and saying he did it. Then they tried to fire him but he didn't show up for 3 days. They basically drove to his house to fire him. Wait, why did they need to fire him in person? Couldn't they just stop paying him? Watching porn on company computers and came to work high all the time. Also was an hour or two late every day. Guy lasted 1 week. I honestly thought this only existed in movies. I didn't realize there are actually people out there stupid enough to do this. Edit. A lot of comments about how he got hired. I work in finance and from my experience with banks, insurance and investment firms, they all have so far required a bonding process where they run criminal and credit checks on you, as they often take out insurance policies on employees as losses from a mistake can be massive. Nothing came up during that process apparently for him. A customer finally made a complaint about a sexual comment he made. Backstory: this guy was super weird with women, got really depressed a lot and would talk about being alone forever often, despite being 24. When he was in a good mood though, he would apparently be hitting on customers as a cashier at a fast casual restaurant. He's done some pretty creepy things towards women from the stories he's told me. The kicker was when a customer pointed to a picture on the menu and said, "That looks delicious." To which he said, "Not as delicious as you must be." She phoned in and he was fired. 55-year-old slovenly pervert, imagine the stereotypical neckbeard with a few more under his gut-covered belt, walked up to a 17-year-old female employee, grabbed her face in both his hands and told her, "I want to teach you how to please a man." Security escorted him out of the building 20 minutes later. Do you think he came up with that on the spot, or something he'd been practicing for weeks in advance, like someone online told him that'd get him laid with certainty? You are not fired from the military, it's more like ducked up the rest of your life. Anywho, he got caught smoking pot in 4-man berthing on base, and in the subsequent investigation was also on meth, said the pot was to help him sleep after the meth, and found out he had run up and defaulted on $10,000 of charges to his official use-only credit card. All of this 4 months out of boot camp. Came in 3 hours late tripping on acid, after a weekend off at some EDM camping festival. That's why you call out sick, or even NCNS if you're ducked up like that. Unless you're already on a final for time and attendance, just miss work, clear your head, get your right up and don't duck up again for at least 180 days. Missed work is almost always preferable to showing up intoxicated. Or just say, "I'm using a vacation day Monday because I'm going on a camping trip with some old fishing hunting college buddies," whatever. Was told you can't smoke pot on the job site. Was told that whatever he does off the clock, like during lunch, they would look the other way. He told them he needed to smoke at all times to deal with his anxiety. I was the one to recommend him for the position. He called the cops on himself during peak hours because there was a warrant out for his arrest. When prison is the better option. Must have been a worker at Amy's baking company. He called in one night an hour before his shift because he had an ingrown hair on his stomach. The week after that he missed 2 days because he said his dad fell off the roof. What clinched it was he waited until we were slammed and went to the bathroom for the entire dinner rush. We found out a few weeks after he was fired that his dad hadn't fallen off the roof and he'd used that excuse at 3 other jobs. I saw him a few months after that hitchhiking on the road out of town and was obviously on some really harsh drugs. I'm guessing meth. When he first got hired, he had an ankle monitor. He backed into a customer's vehicle 3 times. He missed work several times from being too hungover. He was a jackass a lot. He got pulled over because he drifted around a corner and it turned out he didn't legally have a license and got taken to court. He had gotten 3 DUIs and got arrested twice in 1 week. The second time he was fired, my employers finally decided not to bring him back. I'm gonna guess background checks were an afterthought here. I work at a high-volume brew pub and we had this manager/bartender who was completely nuts. She was crazy manipulative, threatened and physically assaulted multiple employees and constantly stole from the company. She was definitely medicated, and when she drank she would act even more insane and go on tangents half to herself so you weren't quite sure if she was talking to you or not. One night she had a few drinks after work and choked out a hostess and popped a squat on our patio while guests were dining. Like legit pulled her pants down and started pissing next to a table of people who were eating dinner. She was fired and banned from the premises the next day. A car he was loading on the flatbed rolled off down a hill and through a barn. And instead of calling the cops or our boss, he went to the liquor store and downed a bottle of vodka right outside. Edit: this story blew up way more than I expected it to, so I'll add a bit of detail for those that care to hear it. We'll call dumbass employee Gabe just because. Gabe was a relatively fresh hire, 6 months or so. He had already been responsible for damage to several vehicles, and some of my fellow employees, myself included, had tried convincing the boss that he was more of a liability than an asset. But the boss wouldn't hear any of it because Gabe took the majority of the calls he didn't want to handle personally. The late afternoon, everyone is basically already mentally clocked out in their own head if they aren't on call for Rex. 5:30 rolls around and Gabe just got back from a rollover and is about to clock out when one of our best customers, frequent flyers, calls and asks if we could move his fancy-ass old Mustang to the paint shop for some work. Gabe goes and loads it up with little trouble but doesn't set the parking brake very hard or put it in gear. It's a stick shift, drives it over to the paint shop and decides that on the big-ass hill is the perfect place to unload it. Instead of the loading dock, he could have literally driven it flat onto, I assume because he wants to drive the Mustang. So genius Gabe unhooks all his straps and everything holding tension on the car and starts manipulating the bed to extend and lower it. Soon as it gets to a certain angle, that Mustang starts rolling down aforementioned big-ass hill and it rolls into and through the storage area, basically an old repurposed barn, next to the paint shop. I know it sounds like a load of BS, but every single word is true. Way back in the day before internet at home was common, printed some porn at work. But accidentally chose a printer locked inside a female coworker's office. Was he 12? Because I imagine this is something a 12-year-old boy would do and take it back to his bedroom away from the family computer. Hospital tech was working third shift. He was using an out-of-view work computer to view porn. He had been doing this for about a month before he got caught. He was caught because one of the sites had infected the computer. When the decidedly female chief mammography tech started the computer in front of a patient in the mammography room, the screen started filling up with pop-up porn ads. When the investigation was done, the listing of all the sites he visited during his misadventure used up nearly a ream of paper. We had someone that was impossible to work with, largely because he couldn't listen or comprehend what others are saying. This isn't a language issue. He just literally could not comprehend what he was being told. He was so self-involved that it was impossible to get him to stop and listen to someone else. I was lead over him for a project briefly simply because the project was going sideways. My way of dealing with him was to not assign any tasks to him that actually had to be done. I would assign him bugs we had already decided not to fix, and then refuse to help him. His favorite thing to do was ask for help, then argue/refuse to listen and try to make the conversation take as long as possible, keeping the other person from doing their job. In the end, he got put on a PIP. He argued with our boss about it, all the while not comprehending what it meant, then left his office and went to the office of the next person up, who obviously knew of the PIP, and proceeded to argue with him. The great part was that the PIP was about comprehension and listening skills, and he completely failed to listen to this boss as well and was fired on the spot. He then kept saying he would go get his stuff from his desk and could not understand what they meant when he was told he could not go back to his desk and that they would ship him his personal possessions. He just kept repeating that he had to go back to his desk to get his stuff. She got caught breaking federal law by a regulator, then asked the regulator to cover for her. Regulator didn't cover. Edit. LPT. When someone in the workplace makes little things happen your better judgment says probably shouldn't happen, be suspicious. It is very easy to smile and accept the outcome if it's stuff you want. This individual's superiors thought she was a miracle worker. If they had asked questions they would have found out she was misappropriating funds and forging documents. It ended taking down another career besides her own. She said yes to Uniball pens when she should have budgeted for Bics. She got reimbursements for cab rides when someone forgot the receipts. The top people got their last-minute deliveries at the workplace on the day they had to leave straight from work to the airport for vacation, and after a couple of years of cutting small corners, one of her superiors approved one bad idea too many. I work at a large manufacturing plant. About once a week, a dude and his team leader accomplice would come to work before their shift, clock in, hide out in the locker room for 20 minutes during shift change, walk back out the gate and drive to a different job where the two would work for 8 hours. Then the accomplice would go in the system and put in a clock out time, making it look like they just forgot to swipe their badges on the way out. Getting paid over $20 an hour while not even at the place. Due to absolutely terrible supervision at the plant on off shifts, it surprisingly took months before they got caught red-handed. Fired and a nasty lawsuit for fraud. There are plenty other stories, but that's the ballsiest on the part of the person getting fired that I can think of. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.